Hi there, so this isn't a video you normally see on the channel. I'd like to stick to making goofy meetup videos. But I feel like I have something important to say about mental health education and awareness. This video is about the importance of mental health education and why you should call 988 if you suspect someone is facing a mental health crisis. It also includes feedback for Serena Sun, the head organizer of Socially and a public figure in the world of mental health. I'll be talking about her and her company, Breaking Taboo, a nonprofit focused on mental health education and awareness. Before we begin, I just want to say a couple important things. I'm going to give a quick content warning. This video is much more serious than others on the channel. We're going to discuss heavy topics like serious mental health conditions and suicide. If that's not something you're comfortable watching, feel free to skip this one. I just hope you remember to call 988 if you feel someone is facing a mental health crisis like mania, anxiety, psychosis, or a substance-related issue. I know this is a long video, so I'll provide timestamps down below for different sections. Feel free to skip ahead, go back, or come back later. So in the last video, we ran into Socially. I said the event organizer didn't want to do a combined event with us. A lot of people don't know I've also been removed from that group. These were both because of the exact same reason. In the fall of 2024, I experienced a severe mental health crisis without support. It was a serious mental illness that altered my perception of reality. And unlike a physical emergency where we know to call 911, I couldn't access meaningful help, even though crisis services were available. What I went through could have likely been prevented with better mental health education and by working to close the missing middle in the mental health system. It was because of this lack of support that I went through the worst suffering that I experienced in my life. It lasted over several months. For the first few, I was afraid and confused and made decisions without a clear understanding of reality. That behavior caused real distress for the people around me and severe damage to my social life. In the months that followed, I had to come to terms with how I acted and went through a period of severe depression and hopelessness. My self-worth and joy disappeared, and I could no longer enjoy my hobbies, socializing with others, or even simple things like watching TV. Then medication issues took away my ability to work, left me largely bedridden, and caused immense suffering that made it feel like my life was falling apart. I think it's amazing that I made it through. Now other parts of my life are still standing. What I experienced is common in people with bipolar 1, and I used to worry that I might have the disorder. But the psychiatrist I'm seeing now believes I don't, and that I'm unlikely to experience this again given the circumstances. Many people don't know that a perfect storm of stress, illness, and medication can trigger a severe mental health episode. In September of 2024, I went to CVS for a COVID booster shot. I also got a flu shot along with it. I didn't realize it was a bad idea to get one, and especially both, without talking to a doctor. A few days later, my head started spinning. I had trouble reading or even standing up, so I stayed in bed and called the doctor. It turned out I already had COVID. Boosters usually help by training your immune system, but in my case, I was fighting the booster and the real thing, and a flu shot likely didn't help things. COVID is a strange disease. There's probably still a lot we don't know about it. Under the right conditions, it can affect people in unpredictable ways. I've heard of people developing heart problems, new allergies they never had before, a different sense of taste, or hallucinations and delirium when the infection is really strong. I normally experience COVID like most people do, but I was facing a very severe case. It was so bad that my physical symptoms lasted for about a month and a half, only ending around the middle of October. I believe severe COVID played the largest role, but other things may have contributed too. I was taking medication for my ADHD. It's a stimulant which helps me focus, but stimulants can be dangerous for the mental illness I was about to experience. An on-call doctor also prescribed me Paxlovid. I used to think it played a larger role, but I couldn't find any evidence to support that. What I do know is that I had a list of medications it interacted badly with, required multiple doses a day, and made me extremely sick. I called an ambulance twice and didn't make it through the full 5 days. Even if it helped, it added a huge amount of physical and mental stress. I was also dealing with an intense interpersonal conflict with Serena. Back when we were still considered friends, she had just become co-organizer, and most people saw her as the group's new leader. We were in contact and had tense phone calls about overlapping events between our groups. At the time, we shared some of the same event organizers, and there was already tension around how leadership was shifting between the groups. She had recently unbanned me from her group, and during that call, I felt pressured to change how I ran my events. I didn't see the overlap as a major issue, but the conversation became emotionally intense, and I had a lot of stress during that period. Meanwhile, my COVID symptoms were so severe that they woke me up in the middle of the night. I started waking up and sleeping at random times. It became so disorienting that I sometimes couldn't tell if it was 8 o'clock in the morning or at night. My sleep cycle completely collapsed, and that kind of disruption can severely destabilize your brain. All of this together caused me to have what's called a manic episode. This usually takes a couple weeks, but since so many things were happening at once, I believe that's why mine developed so quickly. But before I talk about what happened, I want to briefly discuss how the brain changes during mania, so you can better understand why I acted the way I did. Mania exists on a spectrum, and it doesn't look the same for everyone. For some people, the effects are milder and less outwardly disruptive. In more severe cases like mine, it can drastically alter awareness and perception. This is because mania has a major effect on the brain's chemistry. Chemicals are an important way our brain communicates with us. They signal when we are in danger, when we've accomplished something and should feel rewarded, or when we've done something embarrassing or uncomfortable. We experience those signals as our mood or background emotional state. You can see how mood affects your behavior or the behavior of others. Most of the time, our mood shifts are stable enough that they don't drastically affect how we see or understand situations. Mania shifts your mood to such an unstable degree that it changes the way you perceive the world around you. I remember feeling a surge of anxiety and excitement, almost like a knob was being turned up in my head. If you've ever been on a roller coaster, you'll know that intense rush when you drop down the first hill. It felt just like that, except I was feeling it all the time. These chemicals are powerful. They are instinctual and can override logic. For example, if someone from a quiet suburb walks alone in a big city at night for the first time, they might feel unsafe even when nothing bad is happening. The brain is sending danger signals, and even if someone from the city told them there is nothing to worry about, those feelings can be stronger than any facts or statistics. Mania increases dopamine, which is a chemical linked to pleasure and motivation, but an extreme increase can also lead to paranoia and perceptual distortions, which are almost like hallucinations. When someone is manic, their brain is constantly searching for reasons why they feel unsafe. This can override logic and even lead to perceptual distortions where they misinterpret sounds and visuals in their environment. In that state, neutral actions, or even boundaries you make to protect yourself, can be seen as hostile. And if you do something openly confrontational, they might believe the reason they feel unsafe is because of you, and that is not a good thing. Because another major part of mania is loss of impulse control. The mood shift is so extreme that it disrupts how parts of the brain communicate with each other. When we make decisions, our emotional centers communicate with our prefrontal cortex. That part of the brain plays a key role in higher reasoning and helps us reflect on our actions. During mania, higher reasoning becomes much weaker, leaving the emotional centers without clear direction. I remember how my thoughts began to change. They were faster, and I began having ideas that I never thought of before. They felt confident, different, and extremely important, and I completely lost touch with how they came across to others. Our higher reasoning helps us stop and think through our actions. It works so instinctively that we almost don't notice it. It even communicates with us non-verbally, which is why we feel uncomfortable or guilty before we do something impulsive. During mania, it felt like those signals weren't there anymore. When I tried thinking things through, it would be distorted by delusional thinking and my unstable mood. This led me to constantly misjudge the impact of my actions. But I kept going because of something I like to call manic confidence. The high levels of dopamine elevated my mood and made me feel very powerful. It's a delusional kind of confidence that has constantly reframed my bad decisions as good decisions, and bad outcomes as part of a larger plan. It's just as instinctual as paranoia, and even if someone tried to talk me down, my mood would keep reinforcing the feeling that I was right. I felt certain and rewarded no matter the outcome, to the point where I even believed my actions came from God and the universe. Making impulsive decisions with delusional confidence is common in mania. A manic person's weakened higher reasoning and manic confidence can change how they respond to things like fear. If something triggers their paranoia, they will likely do things that escalate the situation. It will probably hurt them more than it hurts you, but it can cause serious mental stress. And even though I was severely impaired, I'm not trying to say that I'm free of judgment. The point of the story isn't to excuse my actions or to paint me in a positive light. It's to show how our current mental health system failed to intervene during my episode and the consequences it led to. Whether or not I am morally accountable, that doesn't mean I shouldn't have received help during my crisis. Many people treat mental illness like a character flaw that can be overcome through willpower. This is a big reason why mental health remains a taboo subject. Based on their mission, I believe this is something Breaking Taboo would care a lot about. It also speaks to a deeper societal belief that not only affects mental health, it can keep us stuck in addictive behaviors, prevent us from achieving our goals, and lead us to pass moral judgment on people facing far greater limitations than us. I'll explore this connection right after my story is over. If you want to skip ahead, feel free to use the timestamp below. Even though my episode started quickly, it didn't happen overnight. There was a brief period where it was hard to tell how much mania was influencing my decisions. I began acting unusual and out of character. I was laughing uncontrollably on FaceTime calls, sending wild and overly confident messages in group chats. I sent an out-of-character text message to someone with a swear word. Friends noticed something was off and told me to slow down. Serena and I were in frequent contact around this time. She would tell me about things happening in her group or call asking for help. Some of what she shared made me uneasy, so I talked to people I trusted, and they felt uneasy too. Someone suggested I set firmer boundaries with Serena, along with another event organizer in my group named Zach. I had always leaned towards pacifism and social conflict, but I was feeling pressure from multiple directions. Make Serena an event organizer so she could promote her Breaking Taboo event, and decide what to do about Zach transitioning to socially. I reflected on other situations and how my pacifism left me vulnerable. This time I felt like I had to do something different. First, I texted Zach. We discussed removing him as an event organizer after he fully transitioned to socially, which he seemed to be okay with. But after our conversation, I thought back to his actions in my group. From my perspective, his move to socially contradicted something he repeatedly emphasized. That made me angry and frustrated, and I removed him immediately instead of waiting. This was very out of character for me. I often overanalyzed decisions when it came to my group and social conflict. I did so often that people used to call me an overthinker. Even if I was taking a different approach, I think I would have waited at least a day before making this decision. This is the first time I made a choice purely on my emotion in the moment. However, this happened early when my mania was growing, so I'm not sure how much influence it had during this time. Next, I turned my attention to Serena. Around this time, I found her difficult to approach and socially intimidating because of how emotionally intense our phone calls have become. I remember our last exchange felt extremely overwhelming. I've been in intense phone arguments before, and now was the first time I felt that level of stress. But I believe there was more to it than just our interaction, because I remember feeling that mixture of anxiety and excitement that I now associate with mania. This showed how my sensitivity to conflict was growing. She was someone I genuinely cared about at the time, and I wanted to be honest with her. I wanted to say that several people I trusted felt uneasy about some of the things she had shared with me, and that I had been advised to set firmer boundaries, but I was afraid to bring it up. In the past, I had tried to gently raise concerns about dynamics involving other people, and it led to a long and painful argument. I was naive and likely made connections that didn't exist, but my intentions came from wanting to help a friend. Even though I didn't handle that situation perfectly, the experience left me intimidated to try again. So I framed my concerns as a joke because I didn't know what else to do. She found that insulting and responded in a confrontational way. I remember how that hit me. That manic anxiety and excitement exploded, and her response felt 10 times more frightening than normal. At the same time, I felt delusional confidence that suppressed my natural instinct to back down. From this point forward, my actions were dominated by paranoia. I still had the impulsiveness associated with mania, but paranoia became the driving force. In September, I began seeing threats that weren't there, while the real threats were exaggerated to an extreme degree. I mostly acted out of fear, while my impulsiveness led me to escalate situations and make poor decisions. Serena's response would have normally made me back down, but my manic confidence led me to see the situation differently. I removed her as an event organizer and canceled her Breaking Taboo event. She didn't respond after that. I found her response extremely threatening, but I no longer fully grasped the social consequences, and the lack of reflection felt like bravery. I actually found backing down more terrifying, and I reacted impulsively to end the situation. Almost immediately after, I saw that my status has been changed to not going on an upcoming reunion hall event and socially. That set my anxiety even higher. I was afraid Serena was out to get me, and I shared screenshots of our text conversation with other people. Some agreed that her behavior felt manipulative. Others didn't see a problem and thought I was overreacting. It's possible those screenshots made their way back to her. I couldn't attend the reunion hall event because I was sick with COVID, but after the event ended, I was removed from socially. My paranoia spiked even further. At the time, I was in a WhatsApp group chat with Serena and the rest of my core friend group at the time. Many of them attended both our groups, and I began to fear that they were turning on me. I felt immense pressure every time I looked at the chat, and I believed I had to defend myself or I'd be in danger. But what came out was a really long string of texts. My thoughts were racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I shared things that were deeply personal and embarrassing. The speed and lack of social awareness were clear signs of mania, and even people without a mental health education reached out and told me to get help. Zach was one of them. He was the group's admin and kicked me not long after. He then texted me about getting the help I needed. He also mentioned that I had said inexcusable things to certain people, and for some of them I didn't know what he was talking about. Then he told me he kicked a close friend of mine for being associated with me. I can understand why Zach wanted to remove me from the chat. However, bringing up those last two things made it feel personal. And just like with Serena, I began to perceive him as a threat. I replied with messages that were extremely nasty and out of character. They were painful to look at when I recovered, and I don't think I'd be capable of saying that today. My paranoia made confrontation feel overwhelming. My lack of reflection led me to escalate further. But Zach's reaction makes sense. I also took things personally when I removed him as an event organizer, and I can't expect people without professional experience to handle a manic episode perfectly. That's why I believe this is the moment when calling 988 would have been the most helpful. I learned you can call on behalf of someone else, explain what happened, and share their number. Many people in Zach's group chat had my number at the time. It was early in the episode, and it may have helped prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, Carol called and told me I needed help. I was open to finding it, and I spoke with various doctors over the course of the episode. Unfortunately, it would be a long time before I found the right level of care. Since Serena was the first person my paranoia latched onto, my thoughts began to revolve around her. I became convinced that she was a hacker trying to infiltrate my phone, car, computer, and laptop. I also believed there was a conspiracy where Serena and other leaders in socially were trying to shut down competing meetup groups. I thought back to another group closing months earlier, a spammer appearing after our falling out, and computer glitches that stretched back years. I believed they were all connected, and Serena became someone far more dangerous in my mind. And so this made me terrified that my meetup group and I were in serious danger. This led me to do a lot of paranoid things offline, but I'll only focus on what's important to the story. After rereading old text conversations with Serena, I began to believe they had been altered. One moment the messages looked one way, and the next they looked different. It felt so real, but this was actually the beginning of my perceptual distortions. They're like hallucinations, but instead of creating something new, they changed how you perceive what's already there. There was a brief moment where I thought I was seeing things, but my paranoia had the stronger pull. During a lull in my COVID symptoms, I brought my phone to a repair shop. The owner explained that already sent messages cannot be changed, unless there was some kind of deep hack he didn't know about. I left and drove down the road. Shortly after, I saw a black truck following behind me. I believed it was someone from the dark web trying to kill me. In the coming days, I noticed sounds coming from my computer during the night. There was also an occasional tapping noise from my phone when I set it down. They felt real to me, but they were also perceptual distortions. The computer was actually my creaking desk, and the phone was a leaking pipe from the apartment above. Remember when I talked about someone walking alone through the city at night for the first time? Imagine they suddenly hear a noise from a back alley. It could be harmless and something they wouldn't normally notice. But in that environment, it feels much more dangerous. That's what I was experiencing to an extreme degree. The paranoia was always in the background, sending my brain signals that I was in danger. Everything around me felt like the back alley. I noticed sounds I normally wouldn't, and made connections that didn't exist. The fear was immense, inescapable, and unending. I shared what I thought was happening in a Discord server that included Serena and some of the same people from Zach's group chat. Many of them were also in another server related to sports. Around this time, Zach joined both servers. I found this extremely threatening. When a manic person sees someone as a threat, their very presence can feel frightening. And because mania can turn fear into impulsive action, creating distance can be a safe way to avoid escalation. Although I think it would be unfair for Zach to change his social life because of my mental state. With Zach and Serena in both servers, my anxiety began to increase. Meanwhile, I was texting Amanda, a former friend and event organizer. My COVID symptoms were flaring up again, and I asked if she could take over an event while I was sick, but she refused. We talked about the people Zach believed I had said inexcusable things to. She shared her perspective, including an example where she believed I was angry at two people for hanging out together. That didn't match my understanding. I wasn't angry at them for spending time together. I texted one of them because I believed he gave me COVID. I had gone to a roller skating event and socially. He was there, and I remember feeling sick the next day. Earlier, he had gone to a rooftop bar event with the other person, who later told us he had COVID. I meant to come across as lighthearted, but my weakened high reasoning and use of a swear word may have made it come across as more hostile than I intended. The disconnect felt terrifying to me, and I interpreted it as an attack. My paranoia filled in the gaps, creating a story where Serena was shaping the narrative. I reacted strongly out of fear, and Amanda reacted strongly in turn. I became defensive and started swearing, something I don't normally do, and my responses became aggressive and out of character. I saw Amanda as far more threatening than she probably was, and my impaired social awareness let me blind to how I was coming across. Amanda, understandably, didn't respond to this well. She told me to stop swearing and said she might share our messages with my ex, who was my girlfriend at the time. She swore back and accused me of being dishonest more than once. She also challenged my judgment and questioned Carol's influence over my decisions. I asked to continue the conversation over the phone and later to continue it another time, but Amanda said she wasn't done. I felt trapped and like my back was against the wall. My COVID symptoms continued to get worse, and I desperately needed to go to bed, but I was terrified of not responding. I was afraid of what she would say to the others, and I thought somehow winning the argument would fix things. So I kept going, and it continued to escalate. Out of desperation, I tried to force the conversation to end in an extremely aggressive way. She then blocked me and shared screenshots of our messages in Zach's WhatsApp group. After that, I began to see Amanda as a threat. The two people she mentioned were in the Discord server, and seeing them, along with Zach and Serena, made me feel surrounded. Talking with Amanda made me fear that distorted versions of events were being shared about me, so I tried to defend myself like I had in Zach's WhatsApp group. The server owner deleted my comment and politely asked me to stop. I didn't listen and he removed me. I left the sports server soon after. It was around this time that I went back to living with my parents. I was too afraid to stay in my apartment, and they became concerned about my unusual behavior. They contacted a doctor who suggested I stop taking my ADHD medication. Soon after, my paranoia felt more distant. I returned to my apartment and realized where the noises from my computer and phone were actually coming from. My belief that Serena was part of a larger hacking or meetup conspiracy vanished. Because I didn't know about Mania or how it worked, I believed stopping my medication had solved the problem. But I think this was just my brain repairing itself. Mania exists on a spectrum, and instead of paranoia, my actions became dominated by impulsivity. In October, my manic confidence and weakened higher reasoning led me to make many strange and irrational decisions. And even though my paranoia was weaker, it still had a strong influence. One red flag was that I didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed after learning where the sounds were coming from. I didn't feel those emotions, or even depression, when I was removed from Zach's WhatsApp group or the Discord server. My normal mood was overtaken by something that made me feel really good. I felt euphoric and started going on long walks without getting tired. But that feeling came at a cost. It blocked shame, embarrassment, and the social fear that normally helps us stop and think through our actions. This comes from our higher reasoning, and without it, my thoughts were no longer filtered in the same way. When I tried to think things through, it became distorted by delusional thinking, a belief that I was acting through God or the universe, and an inability to clearly see or anticipate the consequences. At the time, I didn't know what was happening and thought I had gone through some kind of internal transformation where I simply wasn't afraid anymore. I like to call this state of mind manic confidence. Like Paranoia, it overrode logic and shaped how I interpreted everything around me. Out of nowhere, I saw that I had been added to a WhatsApp group chat called Pics. It had no messages, was run by Serena, and included at least one person who wasn't very active on WhatsApp. I can't speak to her intentions, but I knew we were already in another chat called Elope Pics, where her friends and I shared pictures of corn as a joke. It may have been related to that, or to lingering tension around me sharing screenshots of her messages. Still paranoid, I left Serena's group chat and Elope Pics, but then I had the impulsive idea to create a new chat like Elope Pics, but base it on an inside joke between me and Serena. Then I added her and her friends from the old group. This was my attempt to make peace. After realizing Serena wasn't a hacker or part of a larger conspiracy, I wanted to apologize and be friends again. But I wasn't able to recognize how serious the previous month had been or how others might see me after everything that happened. No one responded, and one person even left. Realizing how awkward the situation was, I left too. This moment made me realize how much we rely on our gut and intuition in social situations. You can learn all the communication skills you want, but successful communication relies on our higher reasoning, just like we rely on motor skills when driving. That ability to reflect and feel discomfort before acting helps us stay within social norms and read the room. I was aware enough to tell the situation was awkward, but I didn't understand why I got that reaction. The lack of response increased my paranoia. It wasn't about the larger conspiracy anymore, but I still believed Serena was spreading lies about me. I felt locked in a fight with Socially, and that I had to win to protect my group. Because I believed Serena was spreading lies, I felt people needed to know the truth. In my mind, the best way to do that was to post it in my meetup group. Every group has a discussions page where organizers and members can post messages. These posts appear on the group page and are also sent to members as email notifications. At the time, my group had close to 500 people. If you were about to vent something on a public platform, you'd probably feel uncomfortable as you started typing, and eventually the feeling would become so overwhelming that you'd stop. But as I stared at the empty text field in front of me, I didn't feel anything at all. I only felt the overwhelming excitement of my new idea, and the urgency to act on it now. My awareness was still strong enough that I hesitated, while my manic confidence overpowered my higher reasoning. I posted 2 manic comments. In the first, I said Serena's first name and referenced a joke that led to my manic spiral. In the second, I claimed that I had gotten COVID from one of Socially's events, reflecting back to the roller skating event, and blamed their lack of rules around COVID for allowing it to happen. I believed this at the time, and reacted by adding new COVID rules to my group. That created a disturbance. One person replied to my first comment, asking how any of this was related to our group, and another told me to focus on my own community. That second comment was the kind of direct pushback I would normally find socially intimidating, but I read it without feeling any discomfort at all. Even so, after some reflection, I decided I should listen to group feedback. So I posted another comment saying I would stop discussing things unrelated to our group, but that I wouldn't delete those comments, saying I wanted to take accountability for my actions no matter what others said. That decision was partly driven by my paranoia around Serena and a desire to build trust. While building trust is a good idea, this wasn't the right place for it, and that disconnect shows just how poor my judgment had become. I later talked with Carol on the phone and told her my emotions didn't feel right. I think she encouraged me to calm down and center myself, but it didn't make much of a difference. During my episode, I watched meditation videos that used to help me in difficult situations, but they couldn't change how I was perceiving reality. I felt accomplished when I wrote those comments, even though others' reactions made it clear I should have felt ashamed. I asked a doctor about it, who recommended I find a psychiatrist. I think I left a voicemail for one, but did not get any calls back. Psychiatrists are notoriously hard to reach, and I wouldn't find the provider I needed until the month was over. Meanwhile, I went on a comment spree in my meetup group. I posted more frequently and shared increasingly random comments and memes. I even added a meme to my group cover photo, which probably made the people in the photo uncomfortable. Since I have been removed from group chats that once played a huge role in my community, I think I was trying to create something similar. But instead of keeping things private, my lack of social awareness led me to treat the discussion page like a group chat. My manic confidence kept me feeling excited and rewarded, even though I knew it wasn't normal. People replied asking how any of this was related to the group. Others asked if I was okay, and my member list began to drop. These reactions surprised me, and I became frustrated. To keep my group alive, I even hosted a Sky Zone event while I was still suffering lingering COVID symptoms. My meetup comments may have contributed to the low turnout, and someone attending the event expressed concern for my mental health. I knew I was going through something, but since none of the professionals I spoke with treated it as an emergency, I believed it was something I could control. I began to interpret that kind of concern as something demeaning or hostile, especially when it came from members and socially. Behind the scenes, I sought advice from an experienced organizer with a more assertive approach. Being assertive means recognizing when someone has crossed a boundary and responding without taking things too far. My paranoia and weakened higher reasoning didn't put me in a position to make those choices. Instead, I came up with plans that were far more extreme than her suggestions. The consequences continued to pile up as my comments went on. I could tell something was off, but I couldn't see how much Mania was influencing my behavior. Every attempt I made to correct course was unfiltered by my higher reasoning. I was often surprised and frustrated by the results. Even as my manic confidence kept telling me I was in the right, I felt increasingly incapable of making responsible decisions. I felt overwhelmed and too mentally unwell to run my group, yet stepping back didn't feel like an option. I believe I was locked in a conflict with socially, and that if I stopped now, my group would fall apart. Eventually, Carol pulled me aside and told me that people were texting her, asking if I was okay. They urged her to talk to me, but I laughed manically when she told me I was getting a lot of attention. My thoughts worked backwards from that euphoric feeling, and my manic confidence convinced me these comments were actually part of the larger plan. I believed I was meant to get this attention so I could expose what I thought were Serena's lies to a larger audience. Then I had the sudden idea to start this YouTube channel. My first 2 videos were made while I was manic, and the first recorded an event that only one close friend signed up for. Before the episode, I never would have had the courage to host something with such a low turnout, let alone record myself publicly, but it felt more like an absence of reflection instead of bravery. I had always been afraid of being seen, judged, or embarrassed online. Mania flung me directly into those fears, and that accidentally gave me the strength to face those situations. No one should have to go through that, but I can look back on that first video more fondly than other things from that period. After uploading the video, I crashed in my bed and suddenly felt depressed. It was the first time I felt that way since the episode, and my manic confidence became weaker. I began to feel embarrassed by my meetup comments and started deleting them, but I hadn't recovered enough to handle what happened next. The next day, I attended another event at Johnson's Corner Farm, and was shocked to see Zach and Amanda there. I later learned that Zach had organized a combined event with one of my event organizers. In my paranoid state, their presence immediately felt threatening. It reinforced the sense that I was locked in a conflict with socially. I remember thinking they were manipulating my event organizer and sabotaging my group by promoting theirs. When I look back at photos and videos later, I realized I had remembered Zach's expressions differently. I believe that was a perceptual distortion. Like my paranoia, the distortions weren't completely gone, only weaker than before. Since I saw Zach as the bigger threat, I was confrontational with him throughout the event and made comments that implied that I could damage his reputation. My paranoia made me believe he was far more threatening than he actually was. My weakened higher reasoning pushed me far past my usual limits. Later that night, I texted Carol and the experienced organizer I was seeking advice from, claiming that socially forced a combined event with us. Carol was skeptical, but the experienced organizer wasn't closely involved and accepted what I said as fact. She told me I needed to be different from socially. I looked at my meetup group's discussion page and thought about all the attention I was getting. I believed this was the moment people would finally see how Serena and socially were acting. I wrote my worst comment of all. I'll show it here. I said we wouldn't do any more combined events with socially. I claimed the event had been forced and accused them of only promoting their group, which I genuinely believed at the time. I also accused 2 individuals, Zach and Amanda, of breaking our rules, and I expressed frustration about running the group without the mental capacity to do so. I had some awareness, but couldn't fully see how mania was affecting me, so I blamed my distress on what I labeled toxic people in their group. My paranoia spilled out onto members of socially, and even onto people who were calling Carol out of concern for my mental health. At the same time, my manic confidence convinced me that my actions were a reasonable response to what I was experiencing. Meanwhile, I messaged Zach privately. I believed he was more dangerous than he actually was, that he had crossed a boundary. My weakened higher reasoning pushed me to an extreme. I told him we weren't doing any more combined events and threatened to share personal information about him on social media if he continued. This is something I deeply regret, and it still unsettles me to this day. Before sending that message, I took a walk and some deep breaths. A part of me hesitated, but I believed it was part of God and the universe's larger plan. Therefore, it was the right thing to do. Immediately after, I felt guilt for the first time since the episode. I started to question whether my decisions had come from God at all. But I still didn't understand why the comment on my group's discussion page faced extreme backlash. I received a lot of negative replies. People left the group in large numbers, and it escalated to a point where someone important to my community was hurt and left. Carol soon told me I needed to step down or close the group. At first, my manic confidence kept me in denial and disbelief. I tried to fight off the backlash, but when the experienced organizer I sought advice from replied and told me I should step back, reality finally broke through. Thankfully, Carol was willing to take over the group while I stepped away. I tried to smooth things over with the experienced organizer, but she wasn't receptive. She told me I was using a fake mental issue and as an excuse rather than taking accountability for my actions. In my manic state, I started to see her as a threat, though not to the same extent as Serena, Zach, or Amanda. Being told my mental health wasn't real felt deeply invalidating, and I was still too manic to fully understand why my meetup posts lacked accountability. I did recognize, however, that I had gone too far with Zach, and that threatening personal information crossed a serious line. I felt guilty for pulling her into a situation that escalated far beyond her advice. I tried to apologize and explain what I had said to Zach, both at Johnson Farm and in private messages. But just like in Zach's group chat, I wrote a very long string of messages. I admitted to doing things that crossed boundaries, where I misjudged the impact of my actions. I funneled a lot of my frustration and trauma towards Zach and said things about him I didn't really mean. My communication was intense, unfiltered, and delivered in a confident way that lacked remorse. Reading those messages now actually shocked me, and I can see why they weren't received well. She told me I had no friends on Meetup and nothing to return to. She said she had shared screenshots of our conversation and my post on Meetup in her group chat, which had many people at the time, along with individuals she named directly. Her response caught me off guard. I almost backed down, but my manic confidence still had a grip on me. I laughed it off, replied dismissively, and then blocked her. I now saw her as a threat. I fixated on her claim about sharing screenshots of my messages. Earlier in our conversation, she had removed me from her group chat, saying she aimed to have less drama. What she told me afterward felt like a contradiction. In my manic state, I became determined to prove whether she was lying. That week, I canceled an event because I had stepped away, but I still went as if I were hosting and recorded a video for my channel. It was a less coherent version of this one. I spoke about what happened without the medical understanding I have now or the judgment to speak responsibly on a public platform. I mentioned other people, but thankfully did not name anyone directly. I made the video unlisted so it could only be viewed with a direct link. I unblocked her and sent a provocative message with the link. I wanted to see whether she would share it. I believed that she did. That meant she was likely not lying about the screenshots. Sure enough, the view count increased. I believed I would win either way, because in my manic state, I believed the video was better than it actually was. But even though it made sense to me logically, I started feeling uncomfortable as the view count increased. Eventually, it became so overwhelming that I made the video private and felt immediate relief. And that was the last major thing I did during the episode. The video crossed into November, but most of my impulsive behavior happened in October. I felt deeply traumatized by everything that happened. I went through brief moments of calm, followed by waves of depression, frustration, and grief. As my higher reasoning returned, I felt exposed and afraid to run into people who had witnessed my episode. My old messages and posts became increasingly difficult to look at, but by then I had finally received intervention. I was enrolled in an outpatient program for people who had experienced a mental health crisis. I met a psychiatric nurse, and after hearing what happened, she told me I should have been hospitalized, but it was already too late to prevent much of the damage. This was a tragedy. Other people were hurt by my manic episode, and I was deeply traumatized. Psychiatrists told me I can't hold myself to the same standard as someone who wasn't experiencing mania. The harm was still done, and I'm not free of the consequences. That being said, it's not constructive to hold people to moral standards that go beyond their capabilities. During my episode, my perception of reality was so impaired that self-control wasn't possible. My only way out would have been intervention, which took a long time to find. I saw many doctors during my episode who approached my condition differently. They came to different conclusions, were slow to respond, and didn't treat it like an emergency. It was only when I found psychiatric help that I learned how serious my condition was. I learned this wasn't the fault of any one doctor, but a broader issue. Our medical institutions are often ill-equipped to recognize and respond quickly to certain mental health crises. We have therapists and medical providers who prescribe medication to manage long-term conditions like ADHD, OCD, or autism. We also have emergency services for crises that involve immediate physical danger, like attempted suicide or violent psychosis. But there are mental health crises that fall in between these two options. This is what is often called the missing middle. We don't treat certain mental health crises like emergencies even though we should. You don't have to be in immediate physical danger to cause or suffer serious harm. Some healthcare workers I've spoken with shrugged and said this is just how things work. But this isn't something that should be overlooked. I wasn't the only one who suffered. Others suffered around me, and for all I know, might have painful memories of this experience. I think everyone would have benefited if I got help sooner. The missing middle is a real problem, and filling that gap will likely take serious reform and long-term work. But a good first step would be to have a number that consolidates the crisis resources we have available. What was once the suicide hotline has since expanded into something much larger. 988 is a national suicide and crisis lifeline. It's not only for suicide, it's for people experiencing mania, depression, substance use, or other mental health crises. You can even call on behalf of a friend or peer. They'll usually ask for the person's phone number so they can reach out directly. But even if you don't have it, they can still support and guide you on what to do. The counselors are trained to assess what level of care the person needs and to connect them with appropriate resources. 988 is becoming the new primary line for mental health crisis support, but even with an online awareness campaign, many people still don't know about it. This is for many reasons, but one that concerns me is society's taboo around mental health. Taboos exist because of deep-seated societal beliefs. Spreading awareness and education can be helpful, but if those beliefs aren't challenged, people won't take mental health seriously or seek help when needed. To break this taboo, we need to examine this societal belief. Most people believe in mental willpower and conflate mental health with personality. We believe all our behavior is under our control, and that people who can't control themselves just need to take accountability. This moral framework works most of the time, but although our self-control can be powerful, our mind still has limitations. Even in normal mental health, many adults develop addictions throughout their lifetime. This can range from smoking cigarettes to overeating. We also struggle with long-term goals. For example, many people make their New Year's resolution to go to the gym regularly, but most quit after the first few months. We hold stories of people overcoming challenges through mental willpower and determination in high regard. But willpower alone isn't enough for most people. We feel guilty when we fall short, or avoid that feeling by rationalizing our behavior. It's unhealthy, but it gives us a sense of control. We didn't fail because of our mental limitations. We failed because we didn't choose to continue. I think we are deeply attached to the idea of control. Most people associate their thoughts with who they are, so admitting mental limitations feels like admitting something is fundamentally wrong with us. That fear pushes people towards cold turkey approaches, which are often the least effective. Paradoxically, people have more control when they accept their mental limitations and find ways to work around them. People don't usually overcome addiction through willpower alone. Many smokers quit by changing their environment, removing triggers, avoiding certain routines, or replacing habits. Rather than wasting time struggling and feeling like a moral failure, working around limitations often leads to better results. This is a mindset I wish more people applied to developmental disabilities. People with Asperger's, ADHD, and OCD often struggle to meet society's expectations. As someone who grew up with Asperger's, blame was often placed on me for my shortcomings. Even when it came from a constructive place, it didn't help me overcome my mental limitations and only left me with low self-esteem. I struggled to make friends for most of my life, often inconvenienced people without realizing it, and was ostracized without understanding why. I thought I'd live the rest of my life like this, but that suddenly changed after I found the right therapist and learning resources. While it might look like personal growth, I don't think maturity or life experience were the main reasons I learned better social skills. Without that help, I may still be facing the same struggles today. We're more aware of Asperger's, ADHD, and OCD than ever before, and we still tend to treat them like personality flaws. I think it's a shame they aren't viewed the same way as dyslexia, where specialized training is widely accepted. Even though these conditions affect behavior, they involve real limitations, and I don't think limitations define who someone is. I believe personality is unique to who you are. But recognition is not the same as tolerance. Ignoring harmful behavior isn't practical, and as the head organizer of my group, there are times when I have to remove members who disrupt others' well-being. Sometimes that harm is unintentional, and I can see myself in people who struggle socially. I sometimes do what I can, but I am not a professional, and without clear resources or pathways to care, I often have nowhere to direct someone who needs more support. These experiences made me realize that we live in a society that struggles to value care. When developmental disabilities are conflated with personality, people get left behind, and some may struggle to form meaningful connections for the rest of their lives. When willpower alone doesn't work, we need to find ways to support people in managing their limitations. This doesn't guarantee perfection, but with better mental health support, some people could live fuller, more connected lives. But there are some mental health crises that cannot be worked around. During mania, the signals that tell you when you are in danger, when you are doing something embarrassing, or whether you've accomplished something become so distorted that meaningful choices are practically impossible. The most effective response is withdrawal, limiting access to finances, social media, and major decisions until the episode passes. Doing this alone is challenging and can last a long time. I didn't know I was facing a manic episode, so I acted on decisions I later learned were illogical. After the episode, many of my former friends didn't reach out or show interest in reconnecting. Many people from Zach's old group chat and socially now treat me like a stranger. It felt like the manic episode became part of how I was seen as a person, rather than being recognized as an illness. This is where I feel conflating mental health with personality is especially dangerous. It worries me when we don't treat mental illness as an illness. I suffered severe COVID and became sick with mania. I think the response would be much different if I suffered a stroke or heart problem instead. At the time, Zach's group chat had close to 30 people. If 30 people saw someone collapse from a heart attack, at least one person would call 911. But when my brain became sick with mania, suddenly no one knew what to do. When I later posted manic comments in my meetup group to an audience of around 500, no one suggested calling 988. My behavior shouldn't be tolerated, but the response should be different. It feels like I suffered a physical illness without medical help, and just like a physical illness, I've been dealing with ongoing health problems. Sometimes I look with envy when socially scheduled their Halloween event past midnight because I can't do that anymore. When I was only taking my ADHD medication, I had to be mindful of my sleep schedule, but I could always recover. Now I also have to take nighttime medication and go to bed around midnight, otherwise I won't get enough sleep. I even went through a period where I woke up early every day and couldn't fall back asleep. This has thankfully gotten better, but my life has permanently changed, and I may have to take nighttime medication or even have sleep issues for the rest of my life. Unlike a physical illness, my struggles and health problems have been dismissed or ignored. Some people I've talked to openly attributed what happened to my personality. It makes me feel like my suffering doesn't matter. Trivializing someone's mental limitations, or comparing your own mental state without accounting for theirs, is a form of ableism. I'd even argue that responding to someone struggling to quit smoking with, "just quit, it's that simple," can also be a form of ableism. It trivializes a real mental struggle by pretending it doesn't exist. Many recognize this kind of dismissal as harmful, yet that compassion often disappears when the struggle involves mental disabilities or mental health crises like mania. This mindset needs to change if we want to break the taboo around mental health. We need to recognize how all mental limitations are connected. People experiencing mental health crises and disability share the same underlying struggle as those dealing with addiction or long-term goals. Mental willpower is a useful tool that can also be supported through strategies, programs, and care. Seeking support isn't weakness, and limitations don't define who we are. Responding with support instead of moral condemnation will give people a real chance to live fuller, more connected lives. We need to recognize the ways we dismiss mental health as personality and trivialize others' experiences. That is an invisible form of ableism that magnifies the problem and harms everyone involved. Because of the societal ignorance and lack of mental health care I face, I look to companies like Breaking Taboo to educate people about mental health. They say mental health remains a taboo subject that people are afraid or ashamed to even discuss. In order to save lives, we must kill the silence. In order to kill the silence, we must break the taboo. And I definitely agree. They say mental health is just as important as physical health, and I also agree. I would even go one step further and say mental health should be treated the same as physical health. Just like we know to call 911, we should know what a mental health crisis looks like and how to respond. When I posted that long string of messages in Zach's group chat, even normal people could tell that something was wrong. And it would have helped if Serena, or really anyone, knew about the number on her website. This used to be the number for the suicide hotline. It's over 3.5 years out of date, but it still connects to 988. Like I said before, you can call on behalf of someone else, tell them what happened, and give them their number. Serena and others had my number at the time, but I'm not sure if any of us knew how useful that could be. Calling 988 could have led to earlier intervention and a higher level of care. It might have altered the course of the episode, or even reduced much of the harm that followed. Breaking Taboo's Find Health page only talks about suicide, and the kindest interpretation I can think of is that we disagree about intervention, because I don't believe suicide is the only time you should step in for a mental health crisis. I talked about what happened during my episode. I don't believe this should be acceptable, and my mental state made it impossible for me to take meaningful responsibility. Only stepping in for suicide leaves people like me behind. I don't know how much Serena's son knows about mental health. From my research, she has a degree in psychology and is a certified mental health and development coach. She also has over 11 years of experience as a public speaker, including educating others about mental health through seminars, the Breaking Taboo podcast, and YouTube channel. She has also written multiple articles on mental health education and advocacy on her website. I can't speak to what Serena did during my episode, and my perception was affected by my condition. But from my perspective, what I observed didn't align with what I expected from someone with their background. After I was removed from the group chat, both Zach and Carol said I needed help. I don't think either of them have any formal education in mental health. If they could see something was seriously wrong, it made me wonder what someone with training might have thought in that moment. When I googled signs of mania, the AI overview lists increased energy, rapid speech, racing thoughts, and impulsivity or risky behaviors. These four match how I was acting with these long messages, especially since I said personal information that I wouldn't normally share. I'd imagine someone with a formal education would know more than me looking something up on Google. I also googled what to do if someone is having a manic episode. The AI overview says to stay calm, avoid arguments, and create a quiet, low stimulation environment. It also says to call 988. I don't know if Serena knew at the time, but I wish someone around me had known that resource existed. But maybe she didn't know, and if she didn't know, even with the background I thought she had, I imagine her choices might have been different. If I were in her position, I would have told the group that I might be experiencing mania, recommend people give me space, and ask them to stay calm and avoid arguments if they interacted with me. But Amanda didn't seem to get that message, because she and I got into an argument that escalated immensely. This may have caused both of us mental stress. As the head organizer of my group, I believe my role is to ensure the safety and well-being of my members. I think this is a great philosophy, and it keeps everyone happy and united. Zach and Amanda would have benefited greatly if they had more guidance on how to approach me or avoid me during my episode. The Discord owner handled me the best out of everyone. When I started ranting in his server, he deleted my comment and politely asked me to stop. I didn't listen, not because I saw him as a threat, but because I felt threatened by others in the server. When he removed me, I didn't perceive him as a threat like Zach, because he had been calm and didn't make things personal. I don't know if he acted entirely on his own. I can't know what happened behind the scenes. But if anyone gave him pointers on how to handle the situation, including Serena, then I'm genuinely thankful because what he did worked. But then I was added to a group chat with Serena as admin called Pics. Since I was already paranoid and overwhelmed, being added to another chat only amplified that feeling. I don't know if she understood how unstable I was at the time, but from my perspective, it made things worse. Then when I started posting manically on my group's discussion page, Carol told me that people were messaging her. One of them was someone I understood to be a close friend of Serena. I don't know what advice they had or what any of them knew about resources like 988, but looking back, I can't help wishing someone had brought up crisis lines, a psychiatrist, or even calling 911. Because any of those options might have helped. Instead, the only advice I heard Carol received was to talk to me, but since she's not a trained professional, she couldn't reach me in my manic state. And I'm not sure what Serena was thinking with the combined event at Johnson's farm. If we were planning a combined event while the other group's head organizer was posting impulsively and criticizing our group publicly, I personally would not have let the event go through. Or using my own leadership style, I would have talked with Zach about canceling and moving his event to another day. I imagine he might have listened, but I can't know for sure. It's possible Serena didn't know what was happening. If that's true, I can understand how things slipped through. But from my perspective, it felt like important information, especially since multiple people were messaging Carol. I know from experience that news travels quickly in their group chats, so I was surprised that she might not have been aware. Since the event went through, I attended and saw 2 people I considered a threat in public. This triggered my paranoia and led me to act out during and after the event. I not only caused damage to my own group, I also said aggressive things to Zach during the event, which I imagine was stressful, and I threatened to share something personal about him on social media. I had access to a discussion page with around 500 people. I could have posted it right there and then, or posted something personal about him and Amanda, and now that I am no longer Manic, seeing how close I came to doing that genuinely scares me. Eventually, months passed. I saw the full weight of my actions and felt great sadness and remorse. I eventually returned and apologized to my old friends. I was surprised and grateful that many accepted my apology, including Zach, but I didn't get the impression that Serena did. And so I want to read Serena's bio on Breaking Taboo's About Us page, so you can see why I had certain expectations. Serena's son is the founder and director of Breaking Taboo, an advocate for mental health, a believer in the power of empathy, and a champion for the human potential. Serena practices what she refers to as humanizing humans. After losing several friends to suicide and understanding what it means to go through depression as an adolescent, Serena committed herself to educating people about mental health and suicide prevention, first by conducting seminars on middle school, high school, and college campuses, and then by creating a nonprofit organization. Through Breaking Taboo, she combines her degree and background in psychology, personal development, entrepreneurship, her experience in film, and her many years of philanthropic work to create unique and powerful change. Around 6 months after my episode, I saw Serena a couple times in public. I felt like I was being ignored, and it seemed like she avoided eye contact when I walked into a crowd she was in. But I also didn't try to speak with her either. On July 18th, I apologized to her privately on Meetup. I said I was sorry, explained that I contracted mania due to a series of unforeseen circumstances, and that none of my loved ones or close connections knew what to do. But she didn't respond. This, combined with how it felt when she didn't acknowledge me in public, and hearing from someone, though I don't know if it was true, that she might still be upset, made me feel like Serena's son no longer saw me the same way after the episode. Instead of treating what happened like another illness, like a heart problem or a seizure, her behavior gave me the impression that she saw my Manic episode as part of my character. I can't know whether that impression is accurate or what Serena understood about mental health at the time. But treating mental illness like a character flaw is what creates the taboo around mental health, which directly contradicts the mission of our organization. Breaking Taboo's mission is to kill silence and save lives by breaking the taboos surrounding mental health. They say mental health remains a taboo subject that people are afraid or ashamed to even discuss. Their vision is to create a world where help is accessible for anyone who wants it without taboo, a world where we can talk about our emotions and mentality. They encourage real discussions, conversations, and education around mental health. They say they work to bring important life-saving knowledge to the public, provide resources and tools to get help, inspire active conversations, and transform the way mental health is viewed. And they actively encourage conversations instead of stigmatizing them. And so responding to my apology with silence was not something I expected from the CEO of this company. It feels very dehumanizing and unempathetic, in contrast to the values she promotes in her bio. It feels like she no longer sees me as human, and that made me feel silenced, ashamed, and afraid to discuss my Manic episode. I believe public figures have an ethical responsibility to live up to the values they publicly stand for. According to their website, Serena and Breaking Taboo want to break the taboo around mental health by educating people and raising awareness. So based on her public role and the mission of Breaking Taboo, I believe Serena's son has an ethical responsibility to help educate people about mental health. When mental health advocacy stays strictly professional, people who are struggling can end up without support. The fallout of a Manic episode is not something I would wish on anyone. After mania pushes the brain's reward and mood systems into an extreme state of activation, those systems fall out of balance and need time to stabilize. This leads to a crash or a wave of depression. Not everyone experiences this crash, and I receive different explanations for what caused my depression. But even without it, the environmental consequences alone can be devastating. Imagine being drunk for a very long time, then having to come to terms with several destructive things you did. You can feel like no one cares or understands, and that they only see how you acted, and you're left dealing with a massive hangover, which in my case could represent the health problems I faced after. The outpatient program likely shielded me from the emotional fallout at the end of the year. The environment was extremely supportive, and I was surrounded by others who had gone through their own mental health emergencies. It helped me overcome my fear of running into people who have seen my episode. I even made 2 more videos for my channel. It helped me process what happened, but I think they worked best when they were made for myself. Since I was surrounded by so much support, I lost touch with how those videos, or my previous actions might be perceived by others. Once I left the program, I wasn't prepared to face the magnitude of what I had done. When I returned to meet up in January, I was hit with an immense wave of depression, the worst I experienced in my life. The large group of supportive friends I once had was gone. Many did not return to my events, and some responded coldly or not at all when I reached out. I later learned that some of them had shared and discussed the videos I made at a house party, which may have contributed to their reactions. Worst of all, I had to come to terms with how I acted during the Manic episode. I could now see my manic behavior the way everyone else did, and it was terrifying. It felt like watching a stranger, someone who had possessed my body and done things I would never be capable of. But that stranger was me, and it made me question whether I was as good of a person as I thought I was. This is the only time in my life that I remember feeling more comfortable asleep than awake. My dreams felt like peace, and reality felt like waking up into a nightmare. There were some mornings where I woke up to a burst of adrenaline and fear. I felt fight or flight trying to get away from the situation, but there was no escape. Sometimes I wish I would wake up and discover this wasn't real. The same thoughts repeated every day, that I was a terrible person, that my friends were gone, that Mania had destroyed my life. Those closest to me barely recognized me. All my confidence was gone, and their attempts to pull me out were extremely short-lived. I sometimes tried to be happy for their sake, but my depression was like an unending black hole. I repeated my thoughts aloud and caused them a lot of visible grief and frustration. I began to feel like a burden, and like I was pushing people away. Due to medical concerns, I could no longer rely on a medication that helped me focus. There was even a fear that I would never be able to take it again. I believed I would overcome this limitation through effort and adaptation, but I couldn't. I felt unable to stand still, follow conversations, and like I could only reach a fraction of my previous focus. These are all side effects of ADHD, and it made me feel useless. I thankfully still had my job, but my work was unproductive. I struggled to move projects forward and had difficulty completing my hours. Because of what Mania does to the brain, I worried that it had taken away more than just my focus. I tried to escape through activities I used to enjoy, like going to meetup events, spending time with friends, watching TV, or playing video games. But they no longer gave me satisfaction. They left me feeling empty, and any joy I did feel was fleeting. I remember going to meetup events and being too depressed to socialize. It felt like my social skills were gone, and that I was a husk of my former self. My former hobbies like reading, drawing, and writing suffered the same fate. I once read novels and wrote fiction on a daily basis, but my inspiration disappeared, and over time those parts of my life fell away. It felt like pieces of my personality were fading. I was put on different trial and error combinations to stabilize my mood and find a replacement for my ADHD medication. They caused me deep physical and psychological stress. The medications didn't feel like they were helping, and I didn't feel like myself. Even worse, I went through a period in March where I couldn't sleep for almost an entire month. Anyone who's been severely sleep deprived knows how quickly it breaks down your mind and body. Living through that felt unbearable. Others told me that I must have gotten sleep, but it never felt like it. I was exhausted constantly, yet unable to sleep. I tried sleep medications that didn't work and had to wear a sleep tracking bracelet. No matter what the measurements showed, it never felt like enough. Every night I lay awake for hours, tossing and turning, unable to rest. The moments when I could get up and function became fewer as the month went on. I began staying in bed from morning to night, and my parents had to bring me food because I couldn't take care of myself. Lying there day after day, it felt like there was no end in sight, just more pain and suffering. And before I talk about what happened next, I want to mention someone whose story I saw painful similarities with. It's why I believe early intervention and 988 are so important. In 2019, there was a YouTuber named Etika. He was loved by millions for his gaming and reaction streams. Towards the end of 2018, he began showing visible signs of a serious mental health crisis. His behavior became increasingly erratic and distressed online. Thousands of people watched him, but he didn't receive any intervention. His suffering was mocked, misunderstood, or treated as a spectacle. Systems reacted, platforms, police, but there was no crisis care, and it led to a terrible outcome. In one of his final videos, he talked openly about regret, isolation, and despair. Not long afterward, he died by suicide. And during my crisis, I came closer to that outcome than I ever imagined possible. On April 6th, I was admitted to the hospital for attempted suicide. 988 saw how serious the situation was, and they got me the help I needed. I began attempts in March, and if I hadn't called 988, I don't know what would have happened. I was admitted to a behavioral health unit and stayed there for 11 days. During that time, they put me on the right medication, and my sleep problems disappeared. It took some time, but by the end of May, I started returning back to my old self. Looking back, I appreciate how effective the professionals in the behavioral health unit were. It makes me think about how different things might have been if crisis support had been involved sooner. My beliefs about public figures have shaped the way I see Serena's son. When I think about her, I reflect on all the pain and suffering I went through, and feel a deep sense of hurt and trauma. I am extremely disappointed, because I believed someone in Serena's role would highlight the importance of crisis resources like 988, or the number on her Find Help page. I'm sometimes frightened by how long I suffered and how close I came to losing my life before I finally received crisis support. Although these are my feelings and not statements of fact, the sense of betrayal feels very real to me. And so, after everything I went through, it has been hard to reconcile my experience with my expectations of Serena's son and Breaking Taboo. On a personal level, her bio and Breaking Taboo's mission to kill silence and save lives ring hollow to me. How I was treated by Serena's son, including still being removed from socially, reinforces the belief that mental illness is a character flaw. That belief contributes to silence around mental health and can prevent people from learning about crisis resources like 988. My experience made me especially sensitive to how critical, accurate, up-to-date crisis information can be. Focusing only on suicide intervention, while listing outdated hotline information, risks leaving people without support long before they reach that point. Just as we wouldn't wait until someone is near death to treat a physical injury, we shouldn't wait until someone is suicidal to offer mental health support. Because of my beliefs and personal experience, I no longer feel comfortable supporting Breaking Taboo. I donated to them in 2024, but now I plan to support other mental health organizations that align with my values. If you feel the same way, I'll list some alternatives at the end of the video. You're free to skip ahead using the timestamp below. But I feel like leaving things here would be unconstructive. If Serena's son and Breaking Taboo take my concerns seriously, then there are a few things they can do to help rebuild my trust. First, I think their Find Help page could be updated. I would like to see the old suicide hotline replaced with 988, since it's now the national number for mental health and suicide crises. Their page says 90% of those who die by suicide have an underlying mental illness, and I think the best way to help those people is to guide them towards crisis support before things reach that point. I would like to see mental health crises more broadly acknowledged, not just suicide. That could include helping people recognize when someone may be experiencing a serious crisis, such as mania, psychosis, severe depression, or suicidal thoughts, and guiding them towards support like 988. Suicide prevention is still extremely important, but I think it's equally important that other types of crises are recognized and represented in a meaningful way. And I would like Serena and every Breaking Taboo employee with a mental health education to be able to recognize signs of a serious mental health crisis and when to call 988, even in unclear situations. I think it's reasonable for mental health educators to know more than the average person. And most importantly, if they truly believe in creating a world where help is accessible for everyone who wants it without taboo, then I would like to see them educate people about the missing middle and push for advocacy and reform. Second, I would like a sincere apology from Serena's son, not as a legal admission of wrongdoing, but as an acknowledgement that a mental health crisis unfolded and wasn't responded in a way that reflected its seriousness. Because of a lack of mental health education, I fell through the cracks, endured immense suffering, and came close to suicide. An apology would show me that she recognized what happened, that I am someone her organization wants to support, and that her response aligns with the values she promotes publicly. And third, I don't know much about Breaking Taboo as an organization. I'm not familiar with their supporters, public outreach, educational projects, or Serena's podcast. Even if I researched everything, I don't believe I have the background to fairly evaluate the entire organization. The only person I've interacted with from Breaking Taboo is Serena's son, who is the founder and CEO. Because of that, my impression of the organization is shaped almost entirely by my interactions with her, including her communication style, how she engages with others, and how conflict is handled. As a result, for me to rebuild trust, there would need to be meaningful personal changes in how we interact. Socialise Johnson's Farm and Crawloween events led to a boundary conflict between our groups, and I reached out to Serena to try and negotiate. I shared that I wasn't comfortable communicating with her directly and suggested speaking with a different organizer. That's because her communication style makes me uncomfortable, and I don't always feel confident interpreting her intentions. On LinkedIn, I learned she has over 11 years of public speaking experience. That helped me understand why some of our conversations felt uneven in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. Public speaking is a powerful communication and persuasion skill. Public speakers learn how to organize facts, appeal to emotions, cultivate a public image, and use framing to influence how ideas are understood. Those skills aren't limited to speaking in front of a crowd. They can also show up in everyday social interactions. Public speaking can be positive when it's grounded in transparency and different perspectives are respected, but it can also become harmful through techniques like us versus them framing, social pressure, such as emphasizing how many people agree, selectively emphasizing certain facts, or projecting behavior onto someone else. Regardless of intent, certain communication patterns left me feeling overwhelmed and unsure of myself. Understanding how persuasion and framing worked helped me find language for experiences I couldn't explain at the time. Back when Serena and I were on better terms, I sometimes felt socially pressured in ways that made me uncomfortable. I often felt like it was hard to say no or set boundaries, and that dynamic made it difficult for me to trust her judgment socially. At times, Serena made jokes towards me and others that felt one-sided. They were framed as good-natured, but I wasn't always comfortable with them. Some were repeated, and I wasn't sure how others felt. When concerns did come up, they were often dismissed as being overly sensitive, which contributed to an atmosphere that felt uncomfortable to me. She and I were once part of a friend group where lighthearted joking was common, and you could see some of its influence during my Manic episode. It made me reflect on what should be considered lighthearted and good-natured. I have Asperger's, so it doesn't always come naturally to me. But I believe something is good-natured when the joke is something both people enjoy. Sometimes I couldn't tell whether people did, or if they were just going along because of social pressure. I sometimes felt that certain people were talked about more negatively, often those who weren't getting along with her or who hadn't responded in the way she hoped. At times it felt like there were sides, and I felt subtly pulled into viewing other people through her perspective. That made me uncomfortable, because it made conflicts feel larger than they needed to be, and created tension where there hadn't been any before. There were times when Serena would recount past events in ways I didn't remember, or describe people in ways that didn't fully align with my experience. This left me feeling confused, and while my ADHD can affect memory, I don't recall experiencing the same level of self-doubt when interacting with others. I want to briefly describe a situation where a few of these communication patterns came together. When Serena and I began coordinating between our groups, she described other people's motivations in ways that didn't align with my own experiences. But I trusted Serena and deferred to her perspective over my own. Then there were moments on the phone where I felt significant pressure to agree to things I wasn't comfortable with, especially around boundaries between our groups. When I hesitated or expressed discomfort, the interaction sometimes became emotionally intense, and I found myself agreeing just to end the discomfort rather than because I truly felt okay with the decision. In some of our disagreements, both during coordination and other moments in the past, Serena told me I was gaslighting her, being manipulative, or twisting her good intentions. At the time, I struggled with those labels because they didn't align with how I understood myself or my intentions. Part of what I experienced may have been a difference in communication styles. I have Asperger's, and it took me many years to develop the social skills that help me navigate conversations smoothly. Serena, on the other hand, is a public speaker, a role that naturally involves confidence, emotional expression, and the ability to influence the room. Because of this, I often felt overwhelmed or outmatched in our conflict, and some of her behavior felt socially dominant in ways that made me uncomfortable. Whether intentional or not, it made me feel unsafe being honest or setting boundaries. I trust leaders of mental health organizations who communicate clearly, consistently, and without pressure. In my interactions with Serena, I often felt unsure about what I was being told, and the emotional intensity around setting boundaries was difficult for my mental health. Clear, low-pressure communication is what helps me build trust, and if I felt that consistently with Serena, I would feel more comfortable supporting her organization. And fourth, Serena's leadership style within Socially isn't what I personally expected from the CEO of a mental health advocacy organization. Keeping me removed from the group reinforces a societal belief that feeds a taboo around mental health. I also experience a disconnect between socially centralized authority and the way it is presented as a friend group, and that makes it difficult for me to trust her as a mental health advocate. At a Friendsgiving event, someone mentioned the idea of helping me return to Socially. I don't believe that's currently possible, since Serena hasn't responded to my apology or spoken to me since the episode. But that made me reflect on what returning might actually require. If returning depends on apologizing further or proving that I've changed or learned a lesson, I can't accept my membership back. That would not only be harmful to my own well-being, it also reinforces the idea that mental illness is a character flaw. That belief prevents people from learning about the missing middle, about crisis resources like 988, and allows mental health crises to continue without meaningful support. I could quietly take the blame and move on, especially since my current psychiatrist says I'm unlikely to experience another episode. But after spending time with others during outpatient therapy and in the hospital, I've seen how devastating unsupported mental health crises can be. That's why I believe resources like 988 need to be known across the country. I want to do whatever I can to spread awareness and advocate for solutions to close the missing middle. Socially presents itself as a group for making new friends, and being removed for so long makes me hesitant to return. I don't know how many members agree with that decision, but if exclusion for mental illness is broadly accepted, it doesn't feel like a community where I would feel safe or welcome. For me, treating mental illness as a character issue reflects ableist thinking, and I don't feel comfortable in spaces built on that belief. I find this especially concerning when it comes from leadership, because conflating mental illness with character is exactly what creates the taboo around mental health, and that directly contradicts Breaking Taboo's stated mission. As a leader of both the organization and Socially, Serena's decisions carry weight. From what I've experienced, there wasn't any discussion of crisis resources in response to what happened. I imagine someone who believes in killing the silence and saving lives would value promoting resources and education, because excluding someone for mental illness without doing so doesn't address the taboo. Since the reasoning I personally received from Socially focuses on past trauma and personal frustration, my continued exclusion appears less like something necessary for others' well-being and more like a character judgment. Meanwhile, the other organizers in Socially are event organizers, which means Serena is the only one with the power to remove people, delete comments on the discussion page, ask for donations, and so on. This is how many meetup groups are structured. However, when a group with centralized authority is presented as a place to make friends, and members closely socialize outside of events and are even in group chats together, that mismatch can create unhealthy dynamics around belonging, exclusion, and power. That makes it hard for me to trust her as a mental health advocate. I briefly talked about different group structures at the end of my Crawloween video. This time I want to explore them in greater detail. Meetup groups centered around friendship can grow into large communities, When I was in socially, I used to go over members' houses and socialize closely in group chats. This creates a shared identity and gives people a strong sense of belonging. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's very important to consider what that identity is built upon. I noticed that the power structure in a meetup group can quietly create distance between leaders and members. Like any social media platform, the structure or presentation of meetup can have a large influence on our behavior. For example, Twitter places fewer social constraints on identity, making people more likely to speak their mind or dogpile compared to other platforms. This is because small differences can be magnified when applied to a large group of people. Meetup groups are typically structured around a single person. By default, the head organizer has control over most aspects of the group. While there are ways to distribute responsibility among other organizers, many groups simply default to decentralized structure. This works well for many kinds of groups. But when a group develops a strong social identity, it can create dynamics that concern me. Even before the head organizer does anything, a divide is already understood on a subconscious level. When social or community identity is closely tied to a group, people understand, often implicitly, that this person can remove them from their social circle. As a result, people start filtering what they say, laughing a little harder, agreeing a little faster, and avoiding honest disagreement. To me, that already feels more like self-compliance than genuine friendship, and this can quietly become the foundation of the group. I experienced this firsthand. I used to be in a group chat with my former friend circle and created live when others frequently complained about treatment in another group. I was afraid this conflict would tear us apart, and I wanted to create something that kept us united. I didn't expect people to jump to mine en masse a short time later. I didn't have any leadership experience, and I didn't know the first thing about running a successful group, but I did have the passion and drive to be a leader. I thought I could one day apply these skills to a future career, like running my own company. But I couldn't see the bigger picture. I couldn't see how friendship and company style structure opposed each other. I couldn't see how my group structure positioned me like a boss and my event organizers like employees. And I didn't fully understand the social influence I had or how to have a healthy relationship with my members. I thought simply doing what others told me was immoral. I believe people flocked to my group because the head organizer in the other group was only listening to a select group of people. To avoid that, I created a set of rules to hold myself accountable and posted them publicly so everyone could see them. My goal was to treat everyone fairly, so I wouldn't favor a select group of people. But having a complex set of rules wasn't well received, and it couldn't eliminate my own personal bias. Since I was the only one who could remove people, my decisions carried so much weight. I felt guilty making decisions that went against my own values, but my friends still had to deal with the consequences. The group chat strengthened the shared identity that magnified this divide, and the clash between my values and others' wants made it feel like I was at odds with the group itself. Over time, this created a rift between me and everyone else, and I didn't realize how much of a problem the rules were until it was too late. Without doing anything intentionally, I gradually lost honest feedback, and people became hesitant to speak up. Most of my former community left because of my Manic episode, but this rift would have likely continued without it. It takes something dramatic for people to leave in large numbers. If I didn't face a mental health crisis, people might leave more gradually. The structure of a meetup group can keep these unhealthy dynamics going for a long time. It might have taken me much longer to see the bigger picture. This experience made me realize the importance of having a good relationship with your community. The group is bigger than you, and you may have to compromise your preferences so that others can feel heard or safe. Leadership isn't simply about being a good or bad person. It's a skill. It requires social awareness and an understanding of group dynamics. There's a pressure to make sure people genuinely like you and to have a strong connection with others in the group. Not everyone can do that. And being skilled at leadership doesn't automatically mean someone shares your values or that their interests will always align with yours. In the summer of 2025, I talked with some of the organizers in Serena's group, and I brought up my idea for shared power. One of them said he felt it was unnecessary, and that Serena generally made decisions he agreed with. But I learned he needed her approval for combined events, and that I was not allowed to attend his events. He did tell me about a certain thing Serena would never do, which I took as a clear sign of boundaries and trust. Later, I saw him at another event where a decision Serena had made came up in conversation. It was the very thing he had previously told me she would never do, and the organizer seemed genuinely surprised by it. I don't know whether he later agreed with the decision because his perspective genuinely changed, or because it felt easier to go along. This made me reflect on how centralized leadership can shape group behavior. When one person is in charge of making most of the decisions, they naturally become central to the group's identity. It can be challenging to question something you identify with, especially if it threatens your sense of belonging or worldview. If that identity involves a group, and group identity can become very strong in group chats, questioning the head organizer's decisions can feel like questioning the group itself. So people can feel pressure to downplay concerns or softly comply in order to get along. Some people like this structure because they don't have to worry about making decisions. But like any structure, it has some trade-offs that often go unrecognized. For example, I once heard about a situation where a member was dating the head organizer. The group felt like family, but a difficult breakup changed the dynamic, and many people once considered close stopped reaching out. When belonging depends on the standing of one person, That person holds significant influence over how the group behaves. It's easy to frame those situations around the individual, but I wonder if the outcome would be different if someone else was in charge. Some people see this dynamic, but just like the rift in my group, they hesitate to speak out directly, so instead they quietly leave. Serena's public speaking experience gives her the power to frame ideas and influence how others interpret events. It's easier for someone with those skills to persuade others of their worldview, and people passively going along could lead them to act collectively in unintended ways. When October was around the corner, I learned that an organizer from Socially had posted an almost identical Crawloween event the same day as one of my organizers. Because my organizer posted first, it created some discomfort and uncertainty over how it would affect us. I reached out to Socially's Crawloween organizer and suggested a combined event. That way we could keep our plans without negatively impacting each other. He told me that Serena was still upset with me, but she later rephrased as her not wanting to coordinate one because of what happened in the past. That response caught me off guard, because the situation affected one of my organizers rather than me directly. I reacted emotionally at first, but then tried to refocus the conversation on overlapping events. But when I was accused of creating drama and he said he was blocking me, I decided to cut ties with him. A short time later, Serena created another almost identical event at Johnson's Corner Farm. Like Crawloween, our group had posted first, without any intention of overlap. My organizer reached out to Serena and was taken off guard by her response. I eventually stepped in to host the event myself. I started receiving mixed signals from members of Socially. The day before the event, a member of Socially suggested we have a combined event, which is why we reached out in the first place. After our event was over, another member asked if I was attending Socially's event, and then left because there were too many people. Later, someone told me Serena's event struggled with overcrowding, and that it created some conflict. Meanwhile, many people RSVP'd to our event, but only 2 attended, while many others went to Socially's event instead. Seeing these consequences made me aware of how differences in group size can create pressure, and how people often gravitate towards the larger crowd. After nearly identical events were scheduled more than once, I became concerned about what continued overlap would mean for my community. Since neither Serena nor the organizer I had spoken with acknowledged the impact on our group, I felt it was necessary to step in. People in my group were upset, and I believe my role as head organizer is to protect the safety and well-being of my community. Before Crawloween, I messaged Serena on Meetup. I explained the boundary conflict, why I believed it could affect both our groups, and offered to negotiate through a different organizer. Serena blocked me. Later, I learned how she described the decision not to collaborate at Johnson's Corner Farm. My perspective is limited, but from my understanding, she said no one wanted to collaborate because of past drama. That did not line up with what I had heard elsewhere. The organizer hosting Crawloween clearly said that he didn't want to do a combined event because of Serena. This left me uncertain about how clearly decisions were being communicated, and I began to question whether I could rely on what was being told. Seeing no other way to address the issue, I decided to talk about it in my Crawloween video. If someone from Socially had reached out, acknowledged the impact on my group, and we meaningfully worked together to find a reasonable solution, I may not have released the video in its current form. I even had second thoughts and tried to negotiate with the Crawloween host for better communication. His response did not resolve my concerns. Shortly after posting, I learned the video had been shared in one of Socially's group chats, and that some members were unhappy with my decision. I didn't hear from anyone directly, but I did notice some people were more distant towards me. I later heard that some of the concerns centered around recording at the event. That feedback was confusing to me, especially since a few people in the recording knew that I regularly make videos for my group. One person told me they didn't mind being in my videos before the event, and no one asked me to stop recording at the time. So I wasn't aware anyone felt uncomfortable until afterward. What surprised me more was that the reaction, at least from my perspective, didn't address the underlying boundary conflict that led me to record in the first place. I had tried to resolve the issue of identical events beforehand, but those conversations didn't lead to a solution. When the focus shifted to the recording rather than the overlap itself, it made me wonder how much of the underlying issue was actually understood. I'm not sure the lack of acknowledgement I've experienced reflects everyone I met in Socially. I found people there to be reasonable and willing to talk to me at other events. But during Crawloween, many of them were much more distant. It feels less like a series of personal choices and more like a broader shift within the group. The mixed signals we received around Johnson's farm, along with the Crawloween host referring decisions back to Serena, left me wondering how much of a say everyone had in those decisions. From my perspective, many decisions appeared to center around Serena's leadership. She wrote Socially's rules back when I was in the group. Event organizers needed her approval for combined events, and I saw at least one situation where a decision she made caught an event organizer off guard. I even learned you needed Serena's permission at one point to join Socially. That level of decision-making naturally places her at the center of the group's identity. In several conversations, I heard comments suggesting that Serena's word carries a lot of weight within the group, even going beyond formal organizer decisions. I can't verify those experiences directly, but they align with what I observed around centralized leadership. When a group depends heavily on one person's decisions, it gives them a lot of social gravity. as group chats and socializing outside of events builds a sense of belonging. That person's word naturally carries a lot of weight. It reminds me of the earlier example I shared, where someone's sense of belonging shifted after a conflict with the head organizer. I feel like identity can sometimes become stronger than genuine connection in close, centralized groups, and that makes it harder for me to see them as a friend group. That responsibility can also create blind spots that shared decision-making might have an easier time catching. The overcrowding at Johnson's Farm and the lack of direct communication around Halloween created tension that might have been avoided if more perspectives were involved. I don't want to be part of a community where I feel unable to take initiative during moments of tension. And being part of a group where identity feels closely tied to one person's decisions isn't what I joined Meetup for. Years ago, a relative invited me to a house party. There I met his childhood friends, college friends, and their partners. It was a large, close-knit group, and they're still friends to this day. On Meetup, I've encountered friend groups that were of similar size, but while they had structure, my relative's friend group had no formal rules and didn't revolve around one person making most of the decisions. Their sense of belonging seemed to come from one another, rather than relying on a single leader. Identity that grows out of relationships feels more stable to me than an identity that revolves around one central figure, when alignment with that figure plays a central role in holding the group together. I start to question how conditional those relationships actually are. If my acceptance can shift based on one person's decision, I worry about how well those connections stand on their own, or how they might change if the head organizer stepped away. That uncertainty has made me reflect on what kind of community I want to be a part of. I believe reducing the power gap between leaders and members helps prevent the kind of rift I experienced. That's why I shifted my group towards shared responsibility. I made my organizers assistant and co-organizers, so that they can remove members, moderate the discussion page, and manage group settings instead of everything flowing through me. Our rules are unspoken and based on shared norms, and we rely more on trust than giving one person all the responsibility. I believe groups built this way are more likely to form authentic friendships, because the focus shifts towards trust and relationships instead of going along with one person's decisions. For me to trust Serena as a mental health advocate, I would need to feel confident that her leadership decisions don't reflect ableist thinking or contradict the stated values of her organization. I would also need to see evidence that organizers and members feel empowered to make decisions and to express disagreement. In my experience, decisions like combined events and attendance boundaries were often referred back to Serena. When that pattern becomes consistent, people standing in the group can start to feel tied to alignment with those decisions. That kind of pressure can have real mental health consequences, especially when alignment with a leader starts to matter more than genuine connection. Until then, I'll be supporting and donating to other mental health organizations. I'll list them here for anyone who feels the same way. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, is one of my favorites. It's a nonprofit grassroots organization for mental health advocacy and education. They have a helpline similar to 988, but it's more focused on providing resources and support rather than emergency care. They were very supportive during my depression, and they also work to change public policy around mental illness. Mental Health America, or MHA, is another good organization. It's one of the oldest mental health advocacy organizations in the US, and focuses on mental health education, prevention, and early intervention. One of the things they're best known for is their free, anonymous online mental health screenings, which can help people recognize concerns like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or other conditions early on. They also work on public policy and community programs to improve mental health access nationwide. And Crisis Text Line offers immediate text-based support for people who are in emotional distress. You can text a keyword like hello to their number and be connected with a trained crisis counselor 24/7. It's confidential, non-judgmental, and not just for suicide emergencies. It's also for moments of panic, anxiety, isolation, or feeling overwhelmed. It's not a replacement for 988, but it's an excellent alternative access point for people who can't speak out loud, feel anxious talking on the phone, or are in an unsafe environment. They also have a website where you can learn more about their work and support them through donations. They use what they learn to improve crisis response and mental health education nationwide. I hope Serena's son and Breaking Taboo take a moment to reflect on my experience. I also hope this video encourages broader conversation about how we support people through mental health crises. Moving forward, I plan to spread mental health awareness and education any way I can, through my videos, meetup events, and my interactions with others. Even though what I went through was painful, I believe it also led to positive change.